welcome everybody. As one door closes, another must open, and so we leave the Andrew Garfield, Mark Webb, Spidey franchise to enter the now endangered, possibly over question mark, although I still don't believe that MCU franchise. And yeah, here we go, Spider-Man Homecoming. It's time. And we're definitely gonna have a lot to talk about with this one. I'm gonna right now stop us preemptively from even getting into the current Disney Sony contract negotiations because I get the feeling that if either of us starts on that over either of these movies, it's gonna go on and on. So my self-imposed uh, sort of like limitation where we're sticking to the content of the movies. If you want to hear us talk about the Disney Sony thing, we have a whole discussion video for that already. But yeah, if there's just nothing to add on that front, if everyone who wants to watch along with us has got their movie at timestamp 0, if you don't want to watch along, then you can just listen. We're going to start on 3. So, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I'm gonna pose the same question that I did the last couple of times, which is first time seeing this in theaters, what did you think?
Um, I loved it, and I was worried that Iron Man was going to overshadow him because they they like with marketing this movie, they definitely put Iron Man everywhere,
Yeah.
and that was smart in trying to get people who were leery of another Spider-Man film, especially it being rebooted, even if it's an already pre-established continuity, because a lot of people did not like the previous franchise, and particularly that last movie. So it was smart for them to let people know in bold neon lights this is an MCU Spider-Man film.
Yeah. And it's so weird to think that it's weird for me. Again, this happens with a lot of MCU movies, but it's weird to think of this as a movie that's just barely 2 years old. And my first time seeing it, I was in much the same boat. Anyone who's been following me this long knows that I've had 2017 is what ultimately usurped 2014 for me as the best year on record for comic book movies, especially Marvel properties. With this and Guardians Volume 2 and Logan. And I still don't think it's been usurped yet. This year and last year gave 2017 a lot of competition, but I don't know. For me, this movie is really, really strong. And I don't have what a lot of Spider Man fans had, either going into this or coming out of it, where I had a very specific vision for the character that was either met or not met. I'm just happy to get a Spider Man movie, honestly. And after Amazing 2, which again, I don't even remember seeing in theaters, it felt like kind of a while since I'd gotten a good theater experience with the Spider Man movie. And this one still holds up for me. I really enjoy it.
And I will say, well, actually, if we're bringing Spider-Verse into the discussion, I think Spider-Verse is definitely the best theater experience I've had with a Spider-Man movie.
Yeah.
And just that, the crowd was polite. There weren't too many like super young, obnoxious kids whining or crying the whole time,
I know how
um,
you feel about
or,
those.
or really at all. So that was nice. But yeah, just the crowd was really engaged. You could feel the energy in the room throughout the entire film. But this is a close second to that for sure.
Mm. Also, I love this quite a bit. I love just how real of a character Adrian Toomes feels like. Like he feels like a real sort of grounded middle class sort of like urban guy. And there are a couple of people I know, some who even like enjoy this movie, but mainly it's detractors who kind of like to pretend that it isn't about anything aside from just Spider-Man wants to be an Avenger, the end, period. I feel like I don't know if it was. I assume it's in the screenwriting, but they're really subtle about the whole making the movie about sort of the age gap and how fundamentally the Vulture and Spider-Man's relationship is informed by the fact that they are from different generations. And that just seems like the natural thing to do with the Vulture, and I'm kind of glad that this movie did it while still not being super on the nose about it.
And the 8 years later thing,
Which
like that's dumb and makes no
it
sense.
makes no sense. Like, the only way I could see it possibly making sense is if, like, the whole weird when does Iron Man 2 to Avengers take place? Like, if someone thinks that Avengers takes place in 2010, then I mean, this timeline around that period of time is weird enough that I could understand that. So,
At
like,
the same time, though, we've mostly been playing it as the films move in real time until we get to Endgame and we have the big radical in-universe time jump.
true. Like that's how we've all been taking it, but like again, Iron Man 2 takes place who knows how long after Iron Man 1? A couple of months, maybe? Just the way that Iron Man 2 was kind of screwed up the timeline for a lot of movies just by being kind of careless. And so I don't know when Avengers takes place. I want to say it's 2012, but maybe it's 2010.
Well, I don't even want to get so fixated on the timeline because we've already talked over stuff that I'd like to speak to, and it doesn't ultimately matter.
Yeah, I think we've all collectively decided just to ignore the 8 years later thing. Like everyone. Like we might as well not even acknowledge it. It might as well not be part of this movie. We're ignoring it.
This is, I think, a really fun, smart way to open the movie. And like we're living in a much more modern era, and so this movie is very much keyed into that in the making of this film.
Yeah, and something that I maybe wish we did more of across the two movies is building on this. Like building on Peter as a guy who likes to sort of take videos and document everything, because that could very easily play into if you were going to get a job at like something similar to the Daily Bugle, whether or not you want to say at this point he actually could do a Daily Bugle job. Like
No.
again, it being especially with Far From Home, once we decided we're not going to do the newspaper thing, like yeah, okay, the a more 2019 or like 21st century Peter doing doing vlogs and stuff is more like relatable to the kids, to date myself, than like
Okay,
newspaper photographer.
this is the appropriate place to talk about it. How'd you feel about the introduction to this version of Spider-Man that we got in Civil War?
I feel like that was pitch perfect, would not have changed a thing, like 100% perfect introduction for this Peter. And the fact that his introduction in Civil War worked so well is a large part of why I was so excited for this movie. Like, again, just
Funny enough, this like the bits here from Civil War don't
they
really
do not
match up to what's in Civil War.
they do not line up at all. It definitely feels like the people working on this movie saw the Civil War trailer and worked from that, and which will become a problem with both this and Far From Home, where they do the best that they can, but like it's I get that you want secrecy and stuff, but if you're gonna make
This
your
is a fun
movies,
practical shot.
yeah, that's
Like
fine.
they just had him on wires and he just did the flip.
But like if your movies are gonna be connected, maybe let the people who are going to be building off of your movies watch your movies. Don't keep Civil War a secret from the people who ostensibly have to write a Civil War sequel. And don't make Endgame secret from the people who ostensibly have to write an Endgame sequel. Who
Yeah,
knows how
I mean, like
different?
John Watts knew obviously that Tony Stark dies going into that movie, but
Yeah.
that's basically all he knew.
And again, that's to this movie's favor. That's a bit of an advantage of his role in Civil War being ultimately as minor as it was, where we have his first scene, which is about establishing him as a character, and then he shows up in the airport fight, which is largely just action. So the stuff about like the stuff in the vlog not lining up with what actually happens in Civil War, that's a bit of an issue. But everything else, this movie is generally able to play on building off of Civil War as naturally as anything else.
And to speak to my experience of seeing Civil War for the first time, I think I've mentioned this somewhere, but that was the day that I graduated boot camp, Navy boot camp. And as soon as I left graduation, me and my folks went to the closest theater and saw Civil War, and it just felt like the biggest reward ever for being away from civilization for like 2.5 months. I could not believe what I had seen with that movie, and I really dug their interpretation of Spider-Man.
Yeah,
Um, like there's bits of his characterization that I question and I'm not the biggest fan of, but I think overall this version is very well written, and I think he's extremely well acted by Tom Holland.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people, and I know that some people are just I know that some people are just going to disagree with me on this, especially the people who like really don't like either of these movies. But whether or not you want to get into like, is he a perfect Peter Parker as written or whatever, I don't think many could argue that this version of Peter is at least a compelling protagonist and a fun guy to watch.
Oh, for sure, absolutely.
And
Um,
I'll say that there are some people who I think like coming into this movie, again, wanting a particular version of Spider-Man and even coming off of Civil War, just don't like the idea of him being as enamored with the Avengers as he is, just as a concept.
it just makes sense if you're going to put him in MCU at this time point. Like
Yeah,
if they'd had the rights to Spider-Man, like when they started, that probably would have been what they had gone with. You probably wouldn't have started with Iron Man, and we'd probably be looking at a much different MCU if they had the rights to Spider-Man when they started back in 2008.
yeah. And like you have people who are like, well, I just don't understand why he cares so much. And like, to me, that's the point of opening the movie with the scene that you open with, like properly after the logo. We get what we opened the first scene of Peter Parker is, remember this thing that he took part in that would, no matter who you are, probably change your life if you're his age. Like I don't think this is part of like this movie and so many other MCU movies really cleverly managing to work as standalone features. Where like if you didn't watch Civil War, then fine, watch this movie. All the details you need for what happened to Peter and how that informs Peter's story is laid out in the vlog. So, like, the Avengers were fighting for whatever reason, who cares? Spider Man got invited, and he gets to take part in this fight with these gods among men. And as a kid, that's going to, like, rip him off of the ground and like throw him into the stratosphere. Of course he's going to be fixated on that. And the movie in turn makes his arc about sort of getting over that and realizing where his proper priorities need to be.
So Ned is essentially just a Miles Morales character named Gank, just with the name ripped off and replaced with Ned.
Yeah.
That's exactly what he is. And given what we do with him from Far From Home, I'm conflicted about his role here. Like he works fine for this movie, but if we're going with a loose ensemble cast moving forward from film to film, I'd want him to be significant, like moving forward in the next movie, and he's really not. You could cut that thing with him and Betty. You could cut that completely out of the movie.
Well,
Um,
again, that I definitely agree, but that's part of the weird semi-episodicness of these movies, and especially the kind of that kind of comes naturally to Spider-Man stories where it's like, okay, we decided what we want the story of the sequel to be. It doesn't really make any sense if Ned's just not present, period. So you put him in the capacity that is natural for that story, which is he's just kind of around. Would I have liked him to be more significant in Far From Home? Absolutely. But I would not have liked to compromise that movie in any way just to make that happen. Like for
that's fair. He's not even. he's not an important enough character that really warrants that.
Yeah, and again, he could be that later. Again, depending on where we go with this, wherever Sony slash Disney slash whoever moves on from here decides to take it, he could be a big significant part in number three. I don't like for one movie. Ned was on the side, and then we can leave him there, or we can bring him to the forefront whenever we want, really. And like it's
We
same for
talked
two.
over a lot of the MCU references, but I think they're fun. Um, and like we've this is just a world that's had superheroes and everybody's used to it. It's just part of their culture.
Yeah, they and like we'll keep building on this. So they very much talk about them the way that you kind of talk about celebrities, and like that's of course that's what would happen. Where especially after a while, they would stop being like larger than life figures, unless of course again you're Peter and you get to fight with them, and they just become kind of like public figures. And again, it's that kind of stuff that just because this was on a thing, this was brought up in a discussion that we both watched recently, whether or not it feels like the heroes of the MCU go on enough adventures. Just having people talk about them normally like this, like there's such a constant presence that it's just normal without even needing to make it like an exposition thing. It tells you, yeah, these guys get around a lot and they do stuff that's not necessarily on screen.
Uh, we talked over the exchange we just had, but that's a bit of comedy that actually works. And like most of the comedy, I'm sorry, in this movie works. And there was a scene in the extended version of Far From Home with that guy at the deli that was cut.
Yeah, and just I
I
like
would have liked to keep that. But I really like this suit up scene. I really like that it's all like one take. That's really fun.
yeah, I love how
What is a kind of like a double edged sword with doing his suit the way they've done it is I can always tell when it's CGI. Almost always I can tell when it's a digital double because it's
mm,
skin tight, and unlike the previous suit, there's no like wrinkles or like flapping whenever he's swinging around or jumping.
yeah,
But this is a
which is
fun, almost whimsical little scene. I like the whimsical kind of score.
yeah, like whimsical is a word for it, but part of what I love about it is just how unglamorous it is.
Yeah,
Like in no other, like most other superhero movies, period, but especially the MCU, when you have a hero who like has to put on their costume, they kick over a trash can by accident, and it's like in a rat infested alley, and like rats run by, and they have to like leave their backpack just randomly wherever, and it's gonna be gone when he gets back. Like this whole montage, all this stuff, I just and like him talking to the guy at the deli, I love all that because it really sells you on this is a kid from the city who's kind of just like there's nothing really glamorous about superhero life for him yet.
yeah, it really sells you on the everyman, just friendly neighborhood aspect.
Yeah, it's a really interesting way to start Spider-Man off as him being the every guy relative to everyone else. And again, that's sort of something that we also do with the other everyman in this franchise, Ant-Man, where it's like he's an ex-convict, he starts out his movie in a very unglamorous place. A lot of the like a lot of the visual language that we use for both of these characters' lives is very just very standard, just middle class American life, if not lower middle class, and that really differentiates them from everyone else in the universe. It makes the movie feel a bit more unique by comparison.
I understand why we don't do an actual swing sequence. It's the only big thing missing from this movie, and I get that they feel like they don't have to do that because we've already had like 5 Spider-Man films for this.
And we will do it a lot in the next one. Although, again, I think that ties into the same thing, where, at least for this stage of his career, Peter's not swinging all over the place in a way that we can, like, make look super glamorous or even super like to a degree in this movie, Spider-Man isn't even really a power fantasy the way that he is in the other two franchises, where Peter's life isn't all that great, but when he's in costume, when stuff that's not all that bad is happening, it's like, yeah, being Spider-Man is really cool. This movie, at least in the first act, but through most of it, really commits to being Spider-Man at this age and in a universe with so many other heroes. It's really not the most impressive thing.
That is true. I love the scene in the trailer. It doesn't work nearly as well in the context of the film because they change his jokes, and his jokes here are just not as funny as they were in the trailer.
I agree about that part. Like, the line that he had in the Avengers, I mean, in the trailer, just referring to them as the Avengers, like that I liked more than what we got. But this stuff that he's saying as the fight is actually going on, I don't mind so much.
But I really wish they'd stuck with what he said in the trailer. Like Hulk gives it away. Like that's like
Yeah.
here he's just running with pretending to be that dumb, and it's just not as funny.
Well, I don't think it's him running with pretending to be that dumb. Like that's like yes, that is what's happening, but I don't think that's the joke. The joke is that he's like pretending to inflate these guys' egos while he kicks the crap out of them. Like he's
I don't know.
treating like I took the joke as he's treating them like a big deal because they're dressed up like the Avengers when really they're just common, like easy to beat up guys.
Yeah,
Although in the theater, I remember having a reaction to that. Like I thought that guy was dead when that when the beam hit the deli. I thought for sure that Mr. Delmar was dead, and that was gonna be like our inciting incident, big plot point. Like, oh no, Peter accidentally killed someone. I'm glad that
no,
that didn't end up happening.
I never expected this movie to go there. And I know you don't have this as much as me, and we'll talk about it later when we get to the Washington Monument scene. I really wish, um, like more of that fight could have been done practically. For most of that fight, they just have a CGI guy flipping around, and
Yeah,
it's a really enclosed space. Like you can have wire work, you can have like an actual performer doing cool choreography and stunts. Like,
yeah. Like I'm
and Raimi was a lot better about that.
yeah. Raimi's to be fair, Raimi's a lot better about that than almost any other filmmaker in this genre. But yeah, I don't have the thing where like the thing is I I'm at a place with CG in this movie and just in general in movies period where I'm like unless it's really bad CG, it generally doesn't take me out of the movie. That said, in scenes like that where it could have been done practically, I do kind of feel bad where it's like, okay, it doesn't bother me that it's
And
in a
this is the
movie,
coolest
but
shot in the movie to me.
I don't quite have that, but yeah, this is really cool. But yeah, just like it doesn't bother me the fact that he's CG, but it does make me kind of go, oh, well, you didn't have to do that. Like, what made you make that choice?
This feels like a fun, creative thing that Raimi would have done,
Yeah.
and it's all in one take.
Yeah, I feel like Raimi even would have had him turning around and have Ned be there. But yeah, like, something I'm appreciating even more here is how much the movie is committing to both Peter and Vulture and his gang's antics being as low key as possible. Where like it's obvious, but it doesn't occur to me to like appreciate it. Where it's like Happy's not just being dismissive of Peter because he's dismissive of Peter. Yeah, that is part of it. But also when he's like, I'm sorry, I don't have time for ATM robberies, that really puts it in perspective. That was like another big thing for Peter, like fighting guys with weird laser guns and stuff. And yet, still, really all that's happening is they're robbing an ATM. By the standards of these movies, that's nothing.
That's pretty true. Yeah. Um. I really like Marissa Tomei as Aunt May. Um, Funny enough, the reason she's cast in Civil War is because her and Robert Downey are really good friends that have worked together in the past.
Hmm.
But yeah, I like the little we do with her here. And I know you and I don't see eye to eye about this, but there really should have been talk of Uncle Ben, if not in this movie, then definitely in the sequel, somewhere, anywhere.
I mean, the line we just had is kind of like the closest we get with like an implication.
But as
Like,
I've said before, like we get more of a sense of it in Civil War than we even do in this movie, and I guess that's fair. But um, and like the argument that I've heard you make a fair amount is we've had the origin twice, and the argument that me and Cap have made on multiple occasions is, yeah, but people age and die, and other people are born, and there is a generation of people that didn't see those movies, probably won't go back to those movies, and are seeing this, and this is what they have. This is their introduction to Spider-Man.
just to defend, just to come back on the fence a little bit, I will say I'm not remotely against the idea that they should have brought up Uncle Ben in this movie or even Far From Home. Like, I'm just saying it doesn't bother me that they don't. Again, we'll talk about Far From Home when we get to it, but with this movie, it's like the fact that he doesn't come up does not bother me. I would have been fine if he did come up. In fact, before this movie came out, I always said the natural way that you do it is just don't even make it a big deal. Have a scene where Peter flashes back to the night that he got his powers, the night that Uncle Ben died, whatever. Maybe say it's a nightmare. Just have him wake up and be like, okay, now we understand that this is something that this character has gone through. And
I
again,
don't even feel like you necessarily needed to do that. I feel like that's a little more intrusive than simply having Aunt May or Peter talk about it in passing. Like maybe one of them looks at a photo of him and they talk about him, like they reminisce about him.
the thing is, I think you're right to call it obtrusive. I think either one of those options would have been as obtrusive as each other because, again, the thing you want to think about is like with Ned in Far From Home, we've decided the story that we want to tell with this movie, and we know all of the elements that we're going to put in it to like inform that story. And like Peter and his relationship with Tony and like his age and how that connects or contrasts him with Toombs, his reputation, the fact that he's a very on the ground hero and he maybe wants to get away from that. All of those things, I don't really know how you even have a scene of Uncle Ben like discussion here that doesn't feel super like closed off from the rest of the movie. Like, okay, it's good to establish that Uncle Ben was a thing. Yeah, great, but what does this have to do with the rest of the film? I think that's something that you just can't get around if you decide to completely skip origin. Unless you want to do what Spider-Man 3 did with Sandman and like tie the origin back.
Retroactively change his origin, and now
Not
it
even
doesn't make.
not even change it, just tie it, make it a plot point again.
Oh
Like
yeah, I
if
think
any
people would have cried foul if they did that.
yeah, like if Uncle Ben is not going to be related to the plot or even just the character arc of the movie, bringing him up at all, even if you can argue it would be worth it, is going to feel kind of forced. Like here's the Uncle Ben scene for this movie that's not going to have anything else to do with him. This guy in the chair discussion is great. You can
Yeah, when
tell
you've had shows like Arrow and Flash,
all of
that
the CW shows, all
yeah.
of them.
Well, I don't really know if Legends has that.
Well, yeah, Legends is probably the one that gets away with it. Like Supergirl, Arrow, Flash,
They
even
all in like to a lot of that is to that show's detriment. Not to jump on a major tangent, but I kind of hate that. I
which
hate that
one?
we have a Flash that constantly needs someone in his ear for him to be remotely competent.
Yeah. And like again, the reason that you do that is because it's kind of the opposite of the Ned problem for the sequel, which is like
Yeah,
you've got
it's an ensemble cast thing, and we need them to be relevant.
yeah, especially when only one of them has the superpowers, which is why Flash ended up giving most of those characters powers, where it's like you're right, a solution to having Ned be more relevant in Far From Home would be to give him the guy in the chair role where Peter needs his help with stuff. But that doesn't strengthen Peter's character. That doesn't really strengthen that movie. So you kind of pick your poison with a setup like this, where you've got the the supporting cast who wants to be helpful and you want them to be kind of plot relevant, but do you do that at the expense of making things kind of feel contrived and making your character feel like kind of an idiot?
Yeah, we haven't talked about Liz yet. I like her. Um, I Going back to this movie is a little awkward for me because I like Liz, but you know, Peter doesn't get with her by the end, and we're going to jump from to Far From Home, and he already has a crush on MJ that doesn't wholly feel earned. Really?
I'll agree that like a
Like,
lot.
if you were to watch this movie in a vacuum, do you really think that Peter develops a real relationship for her? I mean, and it's hard to
Oh
do that
no,
when you have Peter pining for a different girl in the exact same movie.
like
But
this is I feel like part of this is a discussion for Far From Home,
mhm.
but it's another one of those. This is kind of an MCU wide issue, if you want to consider it an issue, which I do to an extent, where it's like, okay, yeah, no, he did not develop what would feel like any kind of romantic feelings for MJ in this movie. Like we make it a point that at the end of this movie they are friends. That is the stage that they have gotten to when this movie is over. And then almost a year's worth of time passes for those characters in between this and Far From Home. And so it's again, it's an issue of pick your poison. Do you want to show Peter developing feelings for MJ, which would have been what I did, granted, that's the track that I would have taken, but do you then want to do that at the expense of their relationship has been stagnant off screen for months and months and months of in universe time?
And that's the kind of Achilles heel of these movies being put in MCU. Not to
That's
talk
for
about
sure.
that, not to talk about that deal or anything, but when you have Spider-Man having to jump over to Avengers movies and there's all this time in between, you can't really tell a very serialized story with these movies, and it's already hard to do that with movies in general.
Yeah,
But
which is why, and this is something that I was thinking about even before we started the recording, which is just like, do we even want like is are we eventually going to get to a place where people like keep complaining about, I don't think it's going to happen because again, like we bring it up as an issue, but we still generally like both of those movies, so it's not like it's a crippling flaw or anything. But for,
absolutely,
but for the people who want their stories to be really serialized, you kind of just have to ask the question, are these characters that we should be doing movies with at all as opposed to TV shows? Like should,
and Spider-Man will never be that because
and
um,
that is just a thing of like, this is a conversation that goes beyond Spider-Man as a character, beyond Marvel as a
this
franchise,
is one of the
beyond,
best gags in the movie.
yeah, this is spectacular. But like this is a conversation that goes beyond these movies and goes into like the Hollywood studio system as a whole and like the worlds of television and film. Where like in an ideal world, movie budgets would just be put into a bunch of weekly superhero TV shows somehow. But
But
that
not
is
everything can be Netflix or
and
Amazon Prime.
that's just not how decades and decades of history has shaped either of these mediums. And that's not going to change. So what we have are superhero movies, and the way that movie releases work with actors aging and time that you want your movies to feel like they're taking place in the world that they're released to.
And even when you look at stuff like Stranger Things, those kids are aging fast.
Yeah, like this is the world that we're in, and the world that we're in demands that for like it's the most easy option, it's the most practical option to have movies that have, they come out when they come out and time passes in between, and sometimes that means character relationships change off screen, and it's a case by case thing. But again, we'll talk about it more when we get to Far From Home. This,
This first shocker, he's the same actor that played Gray, the main character in
yes,
Upgrade.
a video on which I am still working. I promise to both you and everyone listening to this, that is going to happen. I don't know when, but it's happening. But yeah, we talked over a lot of good stuff. Like I like just the short scene of him considering actually going into the party, and then he
Yeah,
sees the explosions. Like there are people who dislike this movie, and they're like,
that felt like a scene out of Spectacular where his two lives are constantly in conflict with each other.
yeah, and I like that he mutters to himself like, "This is stupid." Like he knows deep down that going into that party to impress people and like get back at Flash is not a smart thing to do, but there is still that instinct in him that's like, but wouldn't it be cool if I had that kind of social clout? And like he almost does it. And then he sees an explosion and he's like, oh no, bad thing happening. I should fix that. And like, I think how much you like this movie and how much you like Peter as a character in this movie comes down to how you interpret like why he does some of the things he does. I know people who really dislike this movie whose argument is that everything Peter does is for the sake of being an Avenger. So like he sees that explosion and he's like what's on his mind isn't people in danger, it's oh hey, something for me to do that I can then tell Happy slash Tony about and like get their respect. That is never how I took it. I always took it as when something bad happens, Peter's first instinct is let me stop the bad thing because, it's my responsibility.
Yeah,
And like, is being an Avenger informing a lot of what he does? Sure, but I don't think it's on his mind right now.
at this particular moment, no.
And I feel like there are people who read it that way, and that will kill this movie for you if that's how you take it.
Um, well, okay, yeah,
And here you have an issue with this.
yeah. You don't get to ignore what his powers are supposed to be for the sake of dramatic tension in your movie. Write a script for the character that you have.
You say that, and yet I feel like this is not the only time this has happened. Like Spidey's, it's
We
in a
we,
lot
we
of
went back and watched the previous Spider-Man films, and with Raimi, that's definitely not an issue. We watched all three. There's instances where he's not always able to react, but he can clearly tell he's in danger and something's about to happen to him.
yeah, but that's coming at him fast, and like we don't like it's not like we slow that scene down. I don't know. He could have felt like something was coming like the second he jumped, and what is he gonna do about it? But
But there you have to make the inferences, and it's not clear.
yeah,
And even then, you're leaping. I don't like that.
which I mean, if you did, uh, if you did
Especially
have,
when we get to Far From Home and they're gonna play it like a thing he needs to have confidence about. It's just his power.
yeah, and like I don't even, yeah, it's and see the more I think about it, the more you're right. Like they could just do it in like 5 seconds. Like instead of having Peter leap from the roof, have him stop, turn around, and then he gets took. Like it would be the exact same amount of screen time. You wouldn't have to change all that much. You'd have to like CG one more shot. That said,
And
though, I really like this.
yeah, and he's the like design and like color scheme of this suit is from Ultimate Iron Man.
Hmm. Yeah, it's just like I like the
That's a
fact.
nice touch, even though that comic is awful.
Yeah, and like I know people who don't like just how much of an explicitly father-son relationship we made with these two, but I really like it. I really think it works. It makes both characters more interesting to me, I think.
Um, the thing I don't like about it and why for me I read it more as mentor and like pupil, like and like a guy like who's idolizing this
Mm-hmm.
person. I can be more okay with it reading it like that than I can an overt father figure because we're flat out ignoring Uncle. Well, not flat out ignoring, but we're doing our best to sidestep Uncle Ben as hard as we can with both of these movies.
Mm. I just
That's what rubs me the wrong way about it. It's not necessarily a problem, but I have a hard time being on board with the idea of Tony as a father figure when he had one and we're not really acknowledging it.
yeah, and then I just don't I just don't know in any circumstance where you bring up Uncle Ben without then needing to retroactively make more of the movie about that. And like granted, one thing you could do is you could bring up Uncle Ben and then have Peter be comparing him to Tony in his mind, but that you could argue maybe muddles some of the things where like if he's doing that, then that takes away from the idea that he's idolizing him to begin with, and we need that to be a thing for the arcs. It's just like, yeah, I think this movie made a choice, and yeah, I think for this movie, for what it decided that it wanted to be, committing to the not mentioning Uncle Ben was probably the most practical decision.
And I will say this, Vulture is freaking amazing. I
He's
can't
a
believe that the best bit. Well, I don't know, like him and Mysterio. Well, I gotta give it to him. I gotta give it to this guy. I gotta give it to this guy over Mysterio because he's more sympathetic,
yeah,
and I have a better understanding. Not that I don't understand why Mysterio does what he does in Far From Home, but this guy's a more fleshed out, fully round character, and I know why he's doing everything that he's doing.
yeah,
And he's more sympathetic, and his costume is so cool. And this is a Spider-Man villain I never cared about in the comics, and we took him and we made him the best villain we've ever had in a Spider-Man movie on screen.
yeah.
Absolutely insane.
And
And
I think that choice with him and Mysterio is more impressive, especially coming off of the amazing movies and Spider-Man 3, which are we've had three Spider-Man movies in a row up to this point, which all have to varying degrees villain problems. And the
this does
last,
not even
yeah,
a little.
the last really strong villains we had were Goblin and Octopus, and even then, they have some kind of issues in the way that they're written, which this guy just does not have. I think
And
at
even the
least,
lesser villains, like the two shockers we have here, like this movie understands pecking order. They're just grunts. They're not like villains of the movie.
yeah, and yet we leave at a place where like if the Shocker who's still alive at the end of this movie like were to come like not even be like the main villain of a movie but were just to like show up doing his own thing at some point, I could buy that.
Yeah, maybe we could open on him like trying to rob a bank, and Spider-Man takes him out.
Yep, that is definitely an idea that I have had. And yeah, like I'll go so far as to say that I think out of all of the Spider-Man movie villains on the page, Vulture is the strongest because there's some iffy things about Mysterio that we can talk about when we get to that movie. Goblin and Octopus are acted really great. They're performed amazingly. They're aesthetically really neat, and they play into the themes of their movies really well. But there are some issues with how they're written, and Vulture, I just think, has the strongest presence, the most consistent character, the most sensical, sympathetic character in terms of the way that he's written. Yeah. And see, I
And
like
I
this. I like the idea that he's not a crazy evil boss guy who's just gonna intentionally kill anyone who rubs him the wrong way or threatens to compromise his business, but he's not gonna feel bad about it either.
yeah, and somehow, and again, like we'll talk more about it when we get to Far From Home. But I think it's interesting that we have a villain here who's informed a lot by Tony, and yet his motivations are kind of more fleshed out and make more sense, even though there's no like flashbacks with him and Tony, and those two characters were never even put in the same room.
And see, that's part of what I like about it, because unlike what we will get with Mysterio and what we've gotten with every other villain who falls under the like wronged by Tony Stark thing, this ties into the themes of the movie and actually strengthens thematically Vulture's character. His conflict with Tony is not remotely personal. It is purely a class conflict. Tony is this big, like, billionaire guy who makes all of these decisions that impact people like Toombs, and they don't know each other, But Tony wields all this power and all this wealth and all of this like influence, and people like Vulture get screwed over. They are not like, there is no vendetta. It is purely a conflict between a middle class guy and an upper class guy who screws over the middle class.
And he chooses to take maybe not necessarily the easy way out, but the wrong way out,
Yeah.
and turning to a life of crime.
And like the wrong way isn't even necessarily that he does like illegal stuff, period. It's that, and again, this is a brilliant way to parallel him with Tony almost. It's that he's dealing in weapons. Like if you were just doing any kind of like whatever thing that happened to be illegal and made him money, you can argue, all right, fine. The capitalist system is screwed up anyway. We can't always expect everyone to play by the rules. But he specifically goes from salvaging things to selling weapons on the black market that are super dangerous and can and will kill people.
Yeah,
That's
he's become what Tony now hates about his former self. He's become an arms dealer.
yeah, that's a really brilliant choice. And like I like how much of this stuff is in the subtext. Like I almost wish it was more in the text just so that people who like to pretend this movie isn't about anything couldn't do that.
But the
But
fact that we're able to speak to all this, and it's like it's here in the movie. We're not just pulling this out of our asses here.
yeah,
I think
no.
that that's just a credit to the movie.
Yeah, it's present. And like a lot of the movies in this franchise, I think a lot of the themes get unfairly dismissed just because they're not as explicated on as they could be. But yeah, this is a movie where like a lot of people right now complaining about Spider-Man like in the MCU not being middle class enough or not being relatable enough. This is a movie that in its subtext is about a lot of very relatable issues.
I don't know why Ned wearing the mask is funny. It just is.
Yeah, it is just like it's part of like it makes you think like why does he have it on? Whose idea was it for him to put it on? Like he just puts it on and Peter doesn't say anything. But yeah, like I appreciate all of the things that this movie chooses to be about while also being a really fun kind of light Spider-Man romp where it's like a lot of people think it's too light and not consequential enough, but this movie manages to be a really fun, like age appropriate, like blockbuster, like movie about youth, while also being a movie about class conflict and a movie about how old you are and how that informs a lot of how you view the world and like the generational gap and like celebrity and idealizing people and where should your priorities be on the ground or up with like the big boys and how does that impact people. This movie is about a lot of really clever things that feel totally natural for a Spider-Man movie to be about.
And a lot of the complaints I've seen from detractors in regards to this movie is it feels like a Disney Channel original movie, and I don't agree with that at all. Just because you're dealing with teens and like young kids in high school doesn't make it a Disney Channel movie. And like
Some
a lot of the comedy here, um, it actually works, and it's not all just like least common denominator slapstick. And like
yeah.
it's a lot of it is from character, and it just works, and it doesn't feel um, juvenile.
And some people I know who make that complaint make it less because they think it's juvenile and more because oh well this doesn't reflect my high school experience. My high school experience was way more gritty and not as clean and friendly. And so like if this movie wanted to be a real high school movie, then it should have been more like more gritty, pretty much more edgy. And I'm like, okay, that's your experience. Speaking to my experience, this movie is pretty accurate. And like I mentioned in my review, like we have to consider this is a magnet school. This is the school for all of the smart kids. It's not going to be like you're not going to have a whole bunch of people who are like gang members in high school or like doing drugs or like all that kind of stuff or like really violent meatheads and that kind of thing. I'm not saying that that's what everyone is asking for, but I feel like there are a lot of people who think that this movie on principle is not true to the high school experience when really it's just their high school experience. I think this movie is pretty close to how I felt in high school, minus the fact that in high school there were way, way, way more sex jokes. So, like, if you want the real high school seal of approval, more sex jokes in the next movie. Make everyone way more immature and just find sex really, really hilarious. But again, that's my high school experience. I feel like this movie generally catches the feel of like a high school full of really smart kids who are also still very immature kids pretty well. Like what's about to happen, what we're about to get, like everyone, like this, everyone's sneaking out to go use the pool without the chaperone's permission, just as like a team bonding exercise thing. I like this. I like that Flash smacks Peter on the butt. You still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Sorry, I got a call from one of my buddies. He was worried about me because of the hurricane.
Oh, oh good. We're all safe for now. But
Yeah.
yeah, I like stuff like this. I like all of the kids getting together to go to go have a little fun night out before the competition. And like I like that Flash smacks Peter on the butt. Again, that's one of my things where I'm like, does Flash not like Peter or does he kind of like him? I don't know. We feel like we're straddling the fence with him in like a fun way. And like I like that little talk where it's like again, I forget if there's still a line about it in the movie, but we like outright confirm in a deleted scene that Liz is 2 grades above everyone else on the team. So having that conversation where it's like Peter's like, "Well, this is really serious to you, isn't it?" And
Well,
she's like,
Ned
"Yeah,
calls her a senior girl.
okay, yeah." So like she has kind of a perspective where it's like, "Well, like my future is going to be based on this stuff. So, yeah, it's serious to me." And that's like that is a step towards Peter coming to see her more as a person and less of like a romantic ideal. And like I just like that. It's a nice, charming little character moment. Like you didn't have to have that, but it's sweet and it's nice.
Karen was a big thing I was really apprehensive of going into the movie.
Yeah, I didn't know about her going into the movie, so just I kind of took her in stride as Peter took her. I was like, oh, him having like a voice in the suit, that's a little weird, but
The
again,
main
it's
reason we do that is because he needs someone to talk to,
yeah.
and like
And
if we're not gonna do the narration thing, which I don't know, maybe they feel like that's a little too gimmicky. Then he needs someone in universe to talk to.
yeah, like even like first person narration across a movie is something that I'd maybe like to see done with the Spider-Man movie, like consistently as we do it in the comics, just to see what that would feel like. But it would feel out of place in the MCU. It would maybe feel more at home in
It definitely
something.
felt out of place in Iron Man.
Well, I mean, stuff like Iron Man
Well, in
doesn't
Iron
even
Man 3,
like
particularly. I
like
mean,
stuff like that is actually similar to how we do it in the Raimi movies, where it's just bookends. Like if it's just bookends, then that's fine. Where it's like I was gonna say, narration would feel more at home in the Raimi movies, and it still wouldn't feel totally at home there. Like those movies deliberately keep the narration to the beginning and the end, and that's what Iron Man 3 does too. Where it's like, fine, if it's a framing device, whatever, makes perfect sense.
well, I mean, not like we expect the hero to die in any of these movies, but if you're gonna do that, you should be careful to not really do that. You know what I mean? Where it's like, don't talk in past tense because it implies that the hero should very much be alive and well if they're just telling the story to you.
Well, alive, not necessarily well, but
That's
yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, that stuff doesn't bother me. It's just I don't know. I'm interested to see what does a live action Spider-Man movie look like, where he's like talking to himself in his off time when it's just him alone, Or do we do what Spectacular does and just have him literally talk to himself? And see, like,
Um, he doesn't often literally do it. It is often in his head. He's not verbally talking to himself.
I think it feels like that to me though, just because so much of it is with him in the mask, and you can't even tell when his mouth is moving anyway. But like, we're gonna get a short uh Spider-Man and Vulture fight scene here. I think I don't want to say for sure, but I want to say that the fact that the fights in this movie are generally not only unimpressive but also just not very lengthy has to do in part with John Watts not being an action director, and also in part with this movie committing to like the low key groundedness of Spider-Man and Vulture at this stage, where like again we've established at this point that Vulture wants to keep things under the radar. So he's not a character who would want to get into a big drag out brawl with Spider-Man anyway. But I also think, I don't know, part of me is caught between, do we keep the like hero v villain fight scenes in this movie relatively low key because that suits what we're saying about these characters, or is it just we're not entirely confident with how to direct a big action scene like that yet?
Well, I think the first part of what you're saying is certainly a factor. Although I do think these a lot of these fights could be more exciting than they are.
Yeah. Well, it's just because that one came and went in a blink. And like I'm not gonna say
And I'm not even saying that needed to be a whole fight scene. That makes sense to be as like short as it is,
yeah.
given the rest of the story and where we take things. But the ferry fight is it's passable. Like I'm not rolling my eyes bored or anything, but it's just not as crazy dynamic as I've come to expect from a lot of the other Spider-Man films.
Yeah. And again, it's like that is an action scene, and Peter does fight a lot of people. But once Vulture actually gets involved, again, it feels remarkably quick. Where like the only fight scene between the two of them that's really an extended battle is the climax, and that I think is the movie's strongest fight scene. But a lot of this movie is kind of action without being fights. Like the next thing that we're going to get is just him racing to save everyone at the Washington Monument. That's not a fight scene. It's an action scene, and it's really tense and well done. But it's for a Marvel movie, for a Spider-Man movie, this movie is very relatively low key with the actual superhero supervillain fighting.
And just speaking from my own experience, this movie was like almost quietly popular. If that even makes any sense. But
Uh, compared compared to the other movies in the MCU, yeah, definitely.
like um and this is very personal to me, but like um we were playing it like on the channels for our ship. It was playing constantly when it came out. Um People almost had the Wonder Woman thing with this, where it's like it was played so many times they almost got sick of it.
Hmm.
Wonder Woman was also a pretty big thing on my ship.
Ultron head.
Ultron head, that's so fun. I
Yeah.
love the Easter eggs.
I hope some way, somehow, we get Ultron back in some form.
And that's honestly, well, I mean, not the Ultron thing exactly. Although, yeah, I feel like I don't know, like we don't have Tony's the one who made Ultron in this universe, and it would feel weird to bring that back. And you're not gonna do Tony. It already feels weird to do an actual Mandarin when our Iron Man is dead, and that's like his arch nemesis.
Hmm.
But yeah, like I wish moving forward, well, if the Spider-Man rights actually, if they actually come to some kind of an arrangement with the deal and everything, if we get a proper MCU sequel, that we kind of scale back um, having our story tied in the MCU so hard and just do some fun references and just make a full throttle Spider-Man movie.
Yeah. And, like, I think these movies do the best that they can at being Spider-Man movies given those constraints, but part of it is just where they're placed. Like these movies are placed in such a way that they're kind of stuck with the amount of references they have, where it's like, for one, putting aside like all of the little references, just because one, this has to do with Tony's stuff getting stolen, and it makes sense that we would do that because we've used Tony to introduce Peter. We've already cultivated that relationship. We're going to continue to do it. And Vulture is tied in with Tony, so of course it makes sense that his stuff is the stuff that gets robbed. And also, once we get to Far From Home, well, it's like Endgame just happened. These movies are kind of stuck with being the
Sequels to MCU movies?
like kind of being the reflections of where the MCU is at that point. And part
Yeah.
of that is again being like, these are kids. These
And the
are
people on the ground would be informed by the bigger stuff going on around
yeah.
them.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Both of these movies are on top of everything we've just said. It's all of those factors plus being the people on the ground movies. It helps the universe feel more cohesive if the people on the ground are, feel like they're living in that world. But like I said, like compared to other superhero like action sequences, this is relatively low key. This is him just running to a building to save his friends, and yet it feels really tense, and it
Yeah.
mixes the tension with the comedy because everyone who's like taking part of the comedic bits, it's like dramatic irony. They don't know that their lives are in danger. Peter does, and he is freaking out right now.
Going back to this movie, I always felt like this was the most convenient thing in the whole film. That bomb going off doesn't kill Ned.
True, that never occurred to me, but yeah, that's probably an issue. Also, I like that, like, MJ is, again, because, like, part of, we'll talk more about Far From Home and, like, their relationship and stuff. Part of why I'm mostly okay with it, even though acknowledging that it's maybe a mistake to skip that part of that relationship, like Peter developing the feelings himself, is one, this
This is
movie was,
another really funny gag. Safety systems are working. Safety systems are completely failing.
we're safe in here. We're gonna be fine. They will die in a few minutes. But yeah, like part of why I'm fine with a lot of MJ stuff in the sequels because I think she's a really, really like well handled character for how little screen time she has in this movie. Like actually count her screen time. She is in this movie for less than 3 minutes, and yet coming out of this movie, I felt like she was uh not fully fleshed out, but like fleshed out character with like a personality and traits and like a little self-contained mini arc to herself about growing to
Okay,
consider everyone friends and stuff.
I gotta talk about this scene while we're on it. You know
Okay.
my thing with this and how much I hate
Yep. Yeah.
that whole sequence he CGI, and there was a bit in the trailer that was so great where like they had him practically like on a platform, and I've seen the behind the scenes like they actually had him on wires doing it, and it looked great. Why would you cut those shots from the movie?
Eh, yeah.
It's one of the it is the biggest thing that takes me out every time I go back to this film.
I'm more bothered by the CG on those birds.
Really?
That that
I'm more
bothers me.
bothered by the fact that I can tell I'm looking at a CGI Spider-Man for this entire sequence, and I know they shot practical stuff, and there was
This
practical stuff in the trailer.
See, I don't have that just because like the fidelity of the CG for me for him is fine. The fidelity on those birds is like those came out of a PS2 game.
Oh man.
But yeah, just like this, the CG aside, because I do agree with you. Why would you cut those bits when you don't have to? That aside, I really like this sequence. And like the more I talk about it, the more
That and oh, go ahead.
I'm just saying the more I talk about it, the more I like what we're doing with like a Spider-Man movie where most of the action isn't really fighting. Like that just like I saying that just makes sense to me as a Spider-Man thing. It's like, more than most superheroes, Spider-Man kind of lends himself to okay, not every action beat in his movies has to be about fighting a villain.
Yeah, he saves people.
Hmm. So what were you gonna say?
Well, I like this bit. I love that we finally used the web wings.
Yes.
I typically don't like. I really hate when we have the web wings as like an aesthetic thing. Like that's just part of his suit. I like that they're retractable here, but
Yeah.
I do like using them. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same. Like the web wings feel like one design element too many on the Spider-Man suit, but if you're gonna have them just to like for that comic accuracy, then cool. Ooh. See, I like this. I like every time he does something and it looks like he's got it under control, something happens and it's like, "Oh no, this is like I like that just how and I don't want to make it sound like this is like a thing unique to this movie because all of these movies to a degree do this. But I like that at no point in this whole sequence does what he's doing seem easy.
And oh, with the exception of having the drone locate exactly where they are.
Yeah, fair enough. But even then, like it constantly seems like, oh man, saving people is like one wrong move and anyone could be dead. Like this is a
And
really well done sequence.
yeah, well, so the CGI thing and Ned conveniently not dying from that explosion when it's in his book bag and he's wearing it. Other than those two things, nothing. There's no other really big glaring issues I have with this movie.
All right. We're about to we're about to have the one deleted scene that I would have kept, we may or may not have already, but like after that, and like after the trip is over, everyone getting. Actually, let me talk about this scene first because it's here because I like this. This is one of those things where, in retrospect, it makes so much sense. Where he already has a reason to be on Spider-Man's case, and yet he's gonna see this news and he's gonna lay off him for a bit. Like getting Spider-Man is gonna very quickly not become a priority of his, and we don't really know why until a second viewing where we're like, oh, he saved his daughter just here. So like it makes sense that he would be like, okay, this guy got in my hair for a bit. He screwed up one of my jobs, but he saved my daughter, so I'll give him this one. And like again, that's a great thing to humanize Toombs as a character. He just said, like, I'm gonna kill him. No, you're not. He just saved your daughter. So he's like, okay, fine. Yeah, this. We cut this scene short, and this is the one deleted scene I would have kept, where everyone gets picked up and stuff, and it's just like a minute or like 30 seconds of MJ just waiting at the bus and no one comes to get her. And that alone tells you so much about what her home life is like, what her relationship with her parents must be like. And like if you'd kept that, that would have even more really fleshed out her character and like informed her in the sequel. Like that is the one thing I would have put back into this movie if I had the choice.
I wasn't even aware of that. That definitely needs to be here.
Yeah. And it's like it's not done with any dialogue and it's just it's 30 seconds. And like I get it, the way that editing movies works is that even if it's a really short scene and even if you really really like it, sometimes stuff that's good on its own might harm the final product pacing wise. You don't know, but I just man, I would have kept that.
And personally, I know it's a fine balance. Like you want your movie to be like typically you want your movie to have a tight focus and a solid through line.
Mm-hmm.
And if stuff doesn't feel like it's necessarily progressing your story along, then you cut it.
it's also it's also the thing that I've been saying, right? Like with the Uncle Ben thing, which is MJ has her own little mini arc in this movie, and yet at the same time, for as much as we use every second of her screen time to inform her character in some way, and like I'll talk more about that in just a minute, but like she is still at the end of the day a minor supporting character. And do we want to dedicate a
I love all
scene?
the I love all the Captain America references. They're really funny, and he's my
Yes,
favorite Avenger, so I always get a kick out of that.
and like there's actually something else I want to talk about right there, but like just with the MJ thing, Like, see, comedic stuff like this, it's quick, it goes by, but there's with that thing that I would have kept in the movie with her parents not coming for her. It is part of that Uncle Ben thing where you have to ask yourself, this movie is not really about her. Yes, that will make her character stronger in the sequel, given some stuff we learn about her, but to what degree do we want to have an MJ scene in this movie that is not really an MJ movie at all? Still, I would have kept it. But something I wanted to mention, which did not even occur to me, I actually heard about it on the Infinity podcast, which is a podcast that everyone should check out. That mentioned in that detention scene, the thing that I've always liked is that Peter is hearing about Captain America telling him to like follow the rules and stuff. Where Peter and the audience both know that Captain America in these movies is a notorious rule breaker, and so that comes off really hypocritical. And I like to think that's part of what makes Peter leave. Not just
Yeah.
I've got stuff to do, but also like this is not like Captain America cannot be telling you this right now. But also,
And Winter Soldier is more justified because Shield was actually Hydra, and the world wasn't aware of that yet. But he was. But with Civil War, like he's going against the UN, he's going against the United Nations. When he's like, "Yeah, I'm not going to sign that, but I'm still going to continue to be a superhero."
yeah, and like whether or not we think it's justified hypocrisy is beside the point. It is still just this is not the character that we've come to know across any of these movies. He's not since film one has
He's
he been the
playing
guy.
the idealized version of him that existed back before he actually became a soldier.
Yeah, he's following a script that was written for him by people who don't get him. But the other thing about that scene is that all of the people in those photos, those black and white photos, like Harriet Tubman, stuff like that, all around Peter, those are also notorious historical rule breakers. And so you've got like even the mise en scène of that scene is all kind of like subtly about Peter's mindset of screw the rules, I'm doing what's right.
Donald Glover, kind of notoriously, I think before the Amazing movies came out, where he was a lot of people were campaigning for him to be Miles,
Yeah. Although I
and
feel like even at the
that didn't end
time,
up happening. But it is very cool to see him in a Spider-Man movie playing a character related to Miles Morales.
he did end up playing that character in the Ultimate cartoon.
That is true.
Although I want to say, even as soon as those fan casts started happening, like he was already too old for that role at that point.
That's very true. Yeah, unfortunately, I think
But
he would
yeah,
have killed it if he was young enough for it at the time.
yeah. But like, again, Peter has a lot of very clear dialogue in this movie to where people who are like, his only priority is being an Avenger and not helping people. I don't get it. Where he's like, these weapons cannot be on the streets. Like, he doesn't make this about like being a
And
big
this is a
hero and impressing people. He makes it about I've got to keep people safe.
and this is a funny, cute scene. But this is the part of his characterization where I question it. I don't know how I feel about it. Where it's like, see, this is really funny. But
Which part of it?
the like him, like the him being in costume, like him wearing the mask, doesn't really instill confidence in him.
Right.
He doesn't really feel like um he's taken on a whole new persona every time he's in costume.
That's true. That's an issue. And like, there are other Spider-Men for whom that's not true. And like, it's not that it's like even out of costume, Peter he's not the most confident guy, but he has a natural confidence to him. But yeah, it would be cool if we had a Peter who in the suit was a noticeably different guy. Even if it was just clearly him putting on a show. And not like the way that we do it here sometimes, where he's like putting on a show with like the voice and everything. Like, I feel like the way that we do it with Garfield's Spider-Man is actually the perfect way to do it, where he feels like the same guy and yet he doesn't. Where out of costume, he seems visibly nervous at times, he's got a few tics, and like in costume, he's way more confident, he's way more like sure of himself. he doesn't have those kind of nervous like affects that he has out of costume, and his accent slightly changes. Like in both of the Amazing movies, Peter has a slightly, ever so slightly heavier New York accent in costume. And like that kind of thing is perfect to me, where it's like he acts and sounds just different enough that you would think it's a different guy.
And what's spectacular, he even has the quippy thing like in his head.
Mm-hmm.
And but he'll rarely like show that off when he's not in costume. It's not until he's in costume that he really lets loose with that side of him.
And even in Spectacular, Spectacular does a similar thing to the Amazing movies too, where his voice is ever so slightly deeper when he's in Spider-Man mode. And I feel like listening to him talk now versus how he just talks in regular dialogue, Tom Holland is doing something similar. I just wish it was a bit more pronounced,
Yeah.
where he did something with his voice. He is
But
doing something, but it's very, very, very subtle. I like this line though. There's no reason that he should know to call him that unless like
it's
because
just a fun thing for comics fans. I'm shocked.
yeah. Although to be fair, maybe there is a reason because Vulture outright said like the guy goes around calling himself the Shocker. So
Yeah, so maybe
maybe
Peter is probably aware of that.
yeah. And see, I had people who one of their complaints about this movie was why didn't Tony tell Peter that he set up this sting operation? I feel like that's exactly what he was about to do before Peter cut off that video call.
Exactly. That's how I read that scene as well.
Mm-hmm.
If Peter only hadn't hung up and gave Tony like 10 more seconds to explain,
Yeah.
but of
And
course that
see,
is classic Peter Parker luck.
that's how I think this movie really, really balances well Peter being a guy who has already learned the lesson about great power and great responsibility, while also being the fact that he is a child and just doesn't know what's best all the time. Where his mindset is, I can't talk right now, Tony. I've got to stop this thing because if I don't, people are going to get hurt. And that's the responsible side of him. But the childish side of him is like, well, obviously,
He
like,
wants to solve the issue himself so he can have the notoriety, and so Tony will
not
acknowledge him
even
as being Avengers worthy.
not even that. It's just he's being impulsive. Like he doesn't think that he has the 5 seconds to talk about it because the deal is going on right now. Whereas if he'd stopped for 10 seconds and maybe considered, all right, maybe there's a reason that Tony's calling me right now and he's talking about the thing that I did in DC. Maybe he's going to pivot to the rest of this. Like it's not even about wanting the notoriety. It's just he's not thinking right now because he's too in the moment. He doesn't have perspective and he's viewing the situation very childishly. He's still his heart is very much in the right place of let me stop this bad thing from happening so people don't get hurt, but he's just too impulsive and
But he
he's
does
not
talk
thinking
in it
clearly.
earlier about the Avengers moving their headquarters upstate, and like the Avengers thing is still very much on his mind, and that
Yeah,
is certainly a factor in his motivation for pursuing this so hard.
yeah. I just think it's less of a problem or less of a factor specifically in
And
him
again, I
hanging
don't
up
want
on.
to add to the fuel of the fire of people who are detractors of this movie, and they're like, "Oh, all he cares about is being an Avenger."
Yeah, no. Like again, it is very clearly something he cares about. The movie is about how he cares about that and he should care about it less. But I just don't think that that's like I don't think it's the reason that he hangs up on Tony because if anything, he would want to keep that conversation going if that was what he was thinking about. Like Tony's
Yeah,
complimenting me, let me follow up on this line of thought. But no, he's like, I gotta fix this now, even if I don't actually know what's going on, and Tony might know a bit more than me. It doesn't matter. I gotta fix it. And he's just, that's a very childish way to view the situation.
now, there's a very iconic shot of the scene that they didn't use, where like he has multiple webs in his hands, and he's holding up the this boat here.
Mm.
What's in context of the movie certainly works better, and of course, like Iron Man coming in and saving
Ooh.
this ferry for Spider-Man was a big worry for a lot of Spider-Man fans going in that Iron Man was just going to come in and solve all of his problems for him,
Yeah.
and luckily that's not really what this movie's about like at all.
Yeah.
Um,
Although it is what this scene is about, and that is
that is what the scene
very
is about.
it is very pivotal to his arc that that's what it's about. And I will say again, with just I understand the people like Cap and others who have the issue of like things have been too easy for this Peter, just that nothing all that bad has happened to him in the macro sense. On a macro level, you can argue that that's true. On a micro level, like scene to scene, I
This
feel
is
like this
another great funny gag. I love this. Like just earlier, he was like, "Great job, Spider-Man,"
it's
and
like, yeah,
Iron Man
go
comes in and
Iron.
shows him up, and he's like, "Oh, the new flashy hero actually did it better than you." Yeah, Iron Man, good job.
Yeah. But again, just like on a scene to scene level, I feel like this movie is very good at making it so that things don't feel too easy for Peter. Like when he grabs those two things, even with just Tom Holland's voice and like the way that he's screaming, like before Tony shows up and like knowing that for as strong as Spider-Man is, that's a big boat and he's only got the two pieces of web. I feel like he could get torn apart doing that. And like in the scene, I feel for him. Like again, nothing he does seems easy in this movie. It always seems like everything is a bit of a struggle for him.
Um, but I also, I mean, it works fine enough for this movie. But you know me, I don't like the whole gadgety thing,
Yeah, I
and
don't I don't really like that either. I guess I've just gotten used to it with these movies and the PS4 game, but my
and
preferred
in the PS4
Spider-Man,
game, I don't even use those gadgets.
yeah, like my preference is he's got the webs, he's got his brain, and he's got like the spider sense and
And with the exception of a scene in the extended cut that I wish they'd left out, I love that we more or less had him that way in Far From Home. He wasn't really using any gadgets there.
yeah. That said, there's a lot to talk about with this scene, but I've been putting it off for a while just because he's such a relatively minor part of this movie. But
This
I
is one
did,
of the strongest scenes in the movie, though.
yeah. I really wanted to briefly praise Bokeem Woodbine because for such a minor role as a second shocker, he lends kind of this weird, intimidating charisma to him. That said, like, yeah, the adult is
And it,
going. See again, like whether you want to view their relationship as father and son, I feel like explicitly that's how it's coded. Like
yeah,
this is not a conversation between a mentor and a mentee. This is a father-son conversation. And like I felt that way about the scene with him like on the little jungle gym thing. And like the fact that he's on the jungle gym. And again, we are very, very, very much making this movie about how Peter is a child. And
which is something this movie can get away with a lot more than the previous incarnations because we have a younger actor. And I'm
mhm,
not of the opinion that just because he's younger, he's automatically better than Toby and Garfield. Um,
no, but given that this movie chooses to be about that, it could not have worked with either of them.
yeah, that is true. And it
This
is
is
it's something that other editors have definitely noticed and made a point of in the tributes that they make for these Marvel movies. But when Tony says, um, "If you die, I feel like that's on me,"
mhm.
like immediately a lot of them will cut to the Infinity War scene of him dying in Tony's arms.
See, I love this. I'm sorry, now we're on this scene. I love this scene, and I feel like was it Watts or was it the screenwriters or something? I feel like something changed in between this and Far From Home with how we view Aunt May as a character. Where it's like, could she have had more to do in this movie? Sure. But taking how she is in this movie, had we built on that, I think she would have been great. But she
Yeah,
feels like a different person in Far From Home, where it's like, in that movie, she's just going to be a-okay with him being Spider-Man. And again, time has passed, but even more
but
than
and you could
Peter,
give an like an in universe like at that time reason as to why she can just talk about why she's okay with him doing what he's doing. We don't need a flashback.
Yeah, but like I would have just not taken that route. Like even more than the Peter developing feelings for MJ off screen, I feel like that's a weird off screen development to have, and it just feels like they forgot how to write her character. Because in that scene, when she's like telling him, like, you can't do that, I called 5 police stations, she sounds like she's having a panic attack almost. Like
And
Marissa Tomei is really playing up the anguish. And like
and that
earlier,
feels like a scene out of the Ultimate Comics with Bendis. He
yeah,
wrote Aunt May really, really well, and there was always like whenever the Spider-Man stuff was clashing and he was having to lie to her, um, like we got really tense, really emotional scenes between them.
uh huh. And like earlier in the movie, when she's like, if you see something like that, you run away. Like, again, this is part of why I'm okay with the Ben thing just being an implication in this movie, because in this movie, she is played like somebody who just lost someone.
And given the Ben thing, it's all the weirder that she's okay with Peter just being Spider-Man. Like we need a reason as to why. That's all
You
we
know,
really need.
you know what I think it is from a writing perspective? Maybe they forgot what they were doing with her in this movie, but I think from a writing perspective, they're like, we've established Aunt May as the cool aunt, and she's not going to get a lot of scenes in this movie, so we want the scenes that we give her to keep up with her being cool. But I feel like that does not naturally build off of what this movie is doing with her, where she is the cool aunt, but also maybe she's lost someone close to her recently, maybe not. We know that she has, but like
She's still a
she,
caring aunt,
she's
and
a
not,
caring aunt, not even just caring. She's like she doesn't feel like someone who would be ready for Peter to be Spider-Man. Like I feel like the natural place that you go from here is I'm trying to be supportive, but I don't know if I can deal with this.
yeah. And part of me likes that choice in Far From Home just because it's so interesting and such a radically different shift than anything we've seen before. I
It
mean,
does
she gets
not
to the point
feel
of being okay with it in Ultimate too, but the difference is there's like a whole issue where they just sit down and talk about it.
yeah, like
Like after she's found out and like he's Spider-Man, like they have this whole like really emotional arc where they just sit in the kitchen room and talk about all the crazy dangerous adventures he's had as Spider-Man, and she eventually gets to the place where she's okay with it, but you need to have that,
and it's like
or at
I
least tell us why.
yeah, you need to have it if you're going to build from this place, because on paper by itself in a vacuum, you're right. The idea of Aunt May, an interpretation of Aunt May who knows he's Spider-Man and is like gassing him up and is like all gung ho and is like, "Oh hey, did you take out this crime family tonight?" And it's like, "This is like good luck, sweetie. I fully support your Spider-Maning." Like that's a good idea for like a unique interpretation of Aunt May. It just can't be this Aunt May because that's not who she is in this movie.
And like
Like I like
it,
this.
yeah, this all this is really fun.
Yeah, I like that this version of the character can balance this while also if Peter is gone constantly and not telling her things, she like legitimately freaks out. Like she stops being the cool aunt for a moment and just becomes someone who's like really, really like verklempt about this. Like, I'm gonna drop it after this point, but the next movie just drops that part of her character, and it's so weird.
And the big gas moment right here when we find
Audible
out,
gasps
yeah,
all over the theater.
this is so Spider-Man though. Like this is classic Stan Lee. Like Stan Lee would have had, um, like the
he would have had
personal.
he
He would
would
have
have
had
had
the
him.
personal and the relationship stuff like tie in closely like this.
I was gonna say he and also me, if I were to translate this movie into comic book form, he would have had him open that door. Hey Pete, I'm Liz's dad. And to be continued. Or even not even that, because my mom's first assumption was actually that he killed the family. It's like Peter jumps and the audience jumps when she's like, "Hey Peter," just because it's the first bit of sound we get for a couple seconds. It's like, oof. But yeah, this whole scene is so well done. I feel like if I were to make a comic out of this, it would be he opens the door, surprise, to be continued, and then we just pick up with this scene. And like it's so tense because like again, this movie is really, really good with the little things. Like little tiny things that it doesn't draw your attention to, and yet it makes every scene so much stronger. Like the fact that Peter is so visibly nervous, and it's like we, the audience, know why he's nervous.
And they think
Everyone
he's
else,
nervous just because,
it's
he's going out with
because
their daughter.
yeah, and so we as an audience are thinking like, when does the bomb drop? When does Peter start to act too nervous? Where
And that
someone in
car
the
scene
room,
is really, really well written. That's another one of the best scenes in the movie.
yep, and the knife thing, where like he holds up a knife, and it's like, in any other context, would not matter. Knowing
Yeah.
who this guy is, terrifying.
Yeah. He can't force a smile. He's
Yeah.
that nervous.
And like again, that's a very subtle Pete is a kid thing. Most of the other heroes in the MCU, you get the feeling,
They
would
would have been able to force a smile under pressure.
they would have acclimated to the situation. They maybe even would have thought, okay, how can I use this to my advantage? Peter is a kid, and he's still in the mindset of like, oh man, oh man, oh god, what am I gonna do?
Yeah, he's completely off his game.
And like I want to keep reading into that with like everything, where it's like the first thing he asks him is, what are you gonna do when you graduate? And like Peter can't answer because he's, still processing. And yet again, that calls back to the fact that Liz has her life worked out already, basically.
I love it when we color code in
Mm-hmm.
scenes. I think that's really fun and really interesting.
Yep.
We do it a lot in Daredevil, where like he'll walk into red light. Um, and I'm editing a Daredevil video right now, and actually found a bit of that I hadn't noticed before. It's really cool. But yeah, there's we'll do it there. Um, in the spectacular cartoon, uh, there will be points where he's shrouded in green whenever he's about to face off against a villain.
I
And
like that.
when we get to the light here, they'll say "Good old Spider-Man," and then the light goes green, and it's really ominous.
It's just I love that little line thing that he had where he was like, "Oh, Spider-Man, he's nice. He's a nice man." And here he starts putting the pieces together.
Yeah, you can see him putting the pieces together, and this whole thing is just unraveling because he can't get Liz to change the conversation.
And like again, the great thing about this scene is that it's not like a straight line of him slowly realizing. Like he starts to realize a little bit earlier, and then Peter actually manages to like get him to stop thinking about it like that. And then it just keeps happening, and Peter can't keep reversing it, and it just keeps mounting and mounting. And you're like, he almost got himself out of this. Now he can't.
Yeah,
Ooh, good old Spider-Man. Oh, that's so cool.
yeah. Such a well-written scene, and we're not even done with it. Like well, once Liz leaves,
When he pulls
then he
out
has
that
to.
gun.
Yeah,
Also, we have not talked at all about the score in this movie. I think Vulture's theme is great.
here in particular, yeah.
The Spider-Man movies, for as iffy as their villains have been, with one exception, that being the Lizard, we have had at least one really solid, really interesting villain theme per movie. And see, he just takes super casual about it. He just
Yeah,
takes the gun and he like leans back. And like again, it's just another extension of how this whole movie is about being as low key as possible.
yeah.
Like we've
And,
had
and, and,
other villains threaten heroes scenes before,
mhm.
but none of them have been like this, where it's just a guy with a gun in his car.
And in front of this winter formal, or what is it? Homecoming dance. My
Yeah,
bad, not winter formal.
the thing that's
Um,
in the title. I'll kill you dead.
And I like that he's finally had the time to calm down and process the situation. And he's
Mm-hmm.
calmer now. He's like, this is bad, this is messed up,
Yeah.
but I'm gonna keep a level head.
And level-head enough to leave the phone there, as we will see. So, like, again, given the time to process, that's another little thing of like Peter is really smart. Like his life is being threatened right now, but he is still on top of this situation to the best of his abilities, and he is not backing out here. Like, not even for a second does it cross his mind to give up.
No, he knew before he even stepped out of that car he was gonna pursue this anyway.
Yeah. And that makes him both really brave and really clever. But yeah, like, I like I'll kill you dead as a line because, again, all of the little things, that is like a single sentence line that immediately makes him seem a little bit less learned and a little bit more middle class, where it's like that's just that doesn't even make sense. It's not grammatically correct, and yet not everyone worries about that. It's a humanizing little thing. And MJ flipped him off.
Yeah, that was funny. And of course, him having to give up being with the girl at the dance is classic Spider-Man.
Yeah.
He's got to go in and do the hero thing, and it undermines his personal life constantly.
Mm-hmm. And again, we've got our requisite shot of MJ looking at him because, again, like, we definitely don't establish him being attracted to her. This movie, for as little time as she has, makes it as clear as possible that she is attracted to him, or at the
That is
very
true.
least, very interested in him.
As fun as this scene is, does it really make sense for Shocker to be here? There's no way that Vulture was able to like
The
let him know that this whole situation with Peter was going down, and then position him to wait for him at the back of the school.
Yeah, no, that's just one of those plot holes you kind of just gotta let go.
Yeah, still a really fun scene. Like this is the fun stuff you can only do in a Spider-Man movie where he's still a kid, like having a fight at a
Mm-hmm.
school bus parking lot.
Yeah, and like, again, talking about Bokeem Woodbine, like, again, he doesn't get a lot to do, but with the lines that he's given, he also gets to play. He plays it like a normal guy. Like, he's not like a card carrying supervillain or anything. And yet at the
And
same
I think that's the
time,
point of him.
and yet at the same time, there's something kind of eerie about like how casually gung ho he always is to do violence.
And he's a real fun working man's actor.
Yeah.
How do you feel? We haven't talked, I don't think, at all about Flash and his and the version of him they came up with for this film. How do you feel about him?
I feel like, especially after Far From Home, he works better on paper than he does in execution. Like, I don't know, my mind might change about that when we talk over Far From Home. But he's really interesting because, again, I have my interpretation of him where I think he actually kind of likes Peter. Like, he's maybe doesn't like hate Peter, and he's just ragging on him in the way that friends rag on friends, and it just does not come off that way because he's just naturally kind of a pompous seeming guy. And so what might to him feel like lighthearted ribbing on Peter is just more mean-spirited than he means it to be. I like that he's very much a verbal guy, and like, because he's rich, that gives him the same kind of social clout that being like a football star would give him. So like, he's not gonna do what the old Flash would do and like mess with Peter physically. But like, when either of them gets on Peter's case, they can work up a crowd to take their side. And in one case, it's because they're a football star and they're good for the school's reputation. And in another case, it's he's got all the money and he brings everyone to these fun parties and stuff. And so it doesn't really matter if Flash is like a good, likable guy if he starts crapping on Peter, he's gonna get other people to join him in that. So
Hmm.
in that way, he works as like a factor for like why would Peter want that kind of social clout. Like I do buy that Flash bothers Peter in like a way that when he's talking to himself about like why am I even doing this? Like he's going to go be Spider-Man and like talk about how he knows himself at Flash's party. It's like I buy that Flash bothers him enough that he cares about that kind of thing. So really, relative to Peter in high school, he serves the purpose that Flash needs to serve. It's when we start to get away from that and like just him as a character on his own. I'm like, I don't know. Feel like maybe we should flesh him out a bit more before I make any kind of definitive judgment.
This is another great joke.
Again, Ned is ride or die. Get yourself a guy in the chair as loyal as Ned.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd be willing to tell my teacher that.
Yeah, true friend right there.
This is a fun. That this was like his proto suit that we saw in some little bit of footage that Tony had of him in Civil War. I
Yeah,
like
like
it.
this is really like him putting it on is the first time that we really get to see him in it like clearly. Up to now, it's all been like very sort of obscured video shots and stuff. And I don't know, it's not bad. I like the hoodie aspect in that it kind of reminds me of the Ben Riley suit. But
This is the last costume I wore at a convention, just because
oh
it's so easy to put together and wear.
yeah, I think I remember seeing a photo of you in that actually. And like I like this conversation. I like that this is the movie laying it out and being like, do you understand already that this is a class issue? And yet at the same time, once again, putting aside that from what we've seen of their home life, clearly in the 8 years, or quote unquote 8 years, however long he's been running this operation, he's not really a middle class guy anymore. Like those mannerisms and mindsets are still baked into him because he was already kind of an older guy when he started doing this. But Vulture is more well off than he maybe wants to admit. And it has long stopped being worth it for him to be endangering people's lives just to keep getting the big score. And yet, he is making a decent point where it's like, even if they're not bad people, Tony Stark and really all of the Avengers, by association with him, live in an almost literal ivory tower. They don't have the perspective, like their hero work is not about saving people in the day to day, it's about the big things. There is no one in the MCU at the moment who is looking out for the little things and the little people. And that's the point that Vulture is making. And even though Peter is going to stop him, he is going to internalize that.
Yeah,
And this is another fight that's not really a fight scene.
but all of this, yeah, I freaking love this climax.
Yeah, and this scene that's coming up especially.
And
It,
that whole talk that they just had was phenomenal. Like we clearly have a solid vision for who this character is, and Vulture is just from top to bottom just a great villain. They nailed.
yeah,
He's not just the best villain in a live action Spider-Man film. He's one of MCU's best villains. Period.
yeah. Like, say what you want about the sequel and just how you feel about this movie in general. I feel like this movie has a very strong grasp on all of its characters that it conveys very clearly, no matter how much or how little screen time they have. And that's never something that occurred to me, but like watching this movie, I can tell you who Adrian Toomes is. I can tell you who MJ is. I can tell you who Aunt May is before we screw that up. But like everyone, I can tell you who Happy is based on his relatively minor role in this movie. Every cast member in this movie is very clearly defined and feels like a real person.
Um,
This is
I love this scene. The
yeah,
reference to that master player storyline in the comics, where he lifts all that rubble and stuff in the water,
and again, yeah, we did the
and the
magical.
half symbol of like half his
Yes,
face and half the mask.
that's a
Classic Spider-Man imagery.
that's a visual that we'd never really done, and like we do it all the time in Spectacular. And so I was wondering, like, will we do it in the movie? Come on. And it happened, and I'm like, yes, finally, a live action Spider-Man movie gives us that visual. It was so satisfying. And again, the way that Holland plays it, like him caught under all that rubble, like every single thing this movie does is to remind you that he's a child. And in this moment, he's finally sort of taking that next step to becoming a man. A Spider-Man, if you will.
Yeah.
We're like, finally,
I think it's issue 33. That the Amazing Spider-Man is a callback that they reference for the scene,
yeah.
and
But
it's
like,
awesome.
people like hear the narration from Tony, or like the Tony thing where it's like, if you don't if you're nothing without this suit, you shouldn't have it. And people just keep interpreting that as being a whole, he only lifts that thing up because of part of the Avengers. Like, no, guys, come on, pay attention. The scene is about him maturing and realizing that he has to stop prioritizing that, and that he has to be his own man without the safety nets. And like,
And
again,
he does all of this without those safety nets. It's just him and his powers.
yeah, and like you can argue that like people will be like, oh, but why did he need the safety nets to begin with? He should have already been in a place where he's like self-sufficient as Spider-Man. It's like, maybe in a different movie, but with the movie that we've been given, we've gone out of our way to establish that this is the first like big thing like this that this Peter has had to deal with. And so that's kind of the way that we almost cheat and do an origin story without really an origin story, where Peter was a way that you could almost vocalize it is that prior to this movie and for most of this movie, Peter is a guy in a costume who really wants to be a superhero. And it's after lifting that rubble and doing all this stuff that he has grown into an actual superhero. And so in that way, we've kind of given him his MCU superhero origin.
This is kind of fun. Like we had his henchman guy, the
The
Tinker,
Tinkerer.
constantly talking about do you want the high altitude vacuum seal?
The Tinkerer, who was played by, I'm forgetting his name, but the brother in Orange is the New Black.
Um, Kind of funny that this movie did the invisible aircraft thing before Wonder Woman.
Yeah. Dun, 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 dun. Vulture's theme is just so great. And like, I'm not the biggest fan of Peter's theme in this movie. Just
It's mostly just an orchestra version of the that classic animated series theme.
see, people keep saying that. I don't hear it. Like, there are similarities,
You
but
really don't hear that? That's
there
clearly
are
what they're.
there are clear similarities, but they are also very different themes. Like, I could play those back to back, and you would be like, "No, those are two different things." But at the same time, like when I say I don't love it, I mainly just mean the quote unquote generic version of it. There are a lot of variations on it that I love, and
Yeah,
like,
they're like more lighter bits that sound almost like Itsy Bitsy Spider.
yeah, and like
More
the
playful versions of it.
the version that plays during his montage at school, where they incorporate kind of like a keyboard sound to it. Like, I really like that. Like, there's a lot of variations on the theme that I think work a lot, but like just in the sort of standard hero moments, it does kind of just play like a standard hero theme. I
I,
like this. Yeah, see, like stuff
I'll,
like that I like, as far as like a way that it sounds naturally, the way that he like, that's a natural Spider-Man talking to himself sort of quip. It's like a
Yeah, even though Liz is not his girlfriend.
yeah, like that sounds like that's something that I could read him saying to himself in a comic. And I like this. Like this is a kind of creative thing that we do with the web, where it's like he webs the thing shut just in time that he doesn't get like sliced into little bits by it, and then it like falls out from the turbine, and yet the webs are still there, and so it keeps him held for just that 1 second that he needs to keep himself alive.
Yeah, this is I think this is definitely the best action scene in the movie, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, like this is the
Um,
one where it's straight up Spider-Man versus Vulture fighting each other.
and we'll talk about the ending when we get to it, but I love it for a very specific reason that I don't like. I don't think it's something you would think about, but it's something that I kind of love.
And I think there are some people who, again, this was brought up in the Infinity podcast, who maybe dislike this climax for as big as it is relative to the rest of this movie, where I feel like that's kind of the point where, again, this whole climax from the rubble lifting scene onward has been about Peter
It,
graduating to that point.
yeah, this is the biggest action scene in the movie, and it should be.
Yeah, but also you can debate, like, this movie is about how he has to be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. We've been very low key up to this point. Does it maybe feel a little bit jarring that suddenly, like, we crash a giant billionaire's plane into the Coney Island beach?
Um, and well, I mean,
Like, it doesn't bother me, but if it bothered someone else, I'd be like, yeah, that's fair, I guess. I feel like it's appropriate for what the movie's trying to say.
so do I. Um, this is really smart editing. I love this that we
This is great.
yeah, we drop the sound. Like we just hear the ringing in Peter's ears, and it puts us right in his head.
Yeah. Another thing, even if his hearing is off, this is maybe something he should have seen coming with spider sense. But yeah, he just fell out of a giant plane. Whatever.
This
But
is
like,
fine. Like he's disoriented.
yeah,
He most definitely has a concussion. So I'm
that's
not
it.
going
He
to
right out of
begrudge him
he
not
comes
having
out.
spider sense at this moment.
Yeah, like I love that he comes out of that cloud, and like it's like a millisecond too late for him to react to anything.
And the sound snaps back in.
And
Hey
again,
Pedro. I
even
don't know why he
though
keeps calling him Pedro, but it's funny.
it's just kind of, I like that as just like it's a stupid little dad nickname.
Yeah.
And I like this because Vulture clearly has most of the upper hand here, and yet he is not walking away from that crash or this fight unscathed. Like his suit is messed up, and like Peter is still giving him trouble, even though he is like ostensibly the winner of this fight. Like
Yeah.
the fact that they are both normal guys plays into their whole dynamic across this entire movie.
Peter's certainly a lot more durable.
Yeah. But like neither of them come out of
And I
any
love the
given.
yeah, like yeah, like he it's not just a we have to conveniently have the villain not kill the hero just so the hero can be alive so we can have another movie. It's that character would not kill Peter in that moment. He's not worried about Peter. He respects Peter,
And he's not
and
his priority.
yeah, he's focused on getting that tech so he can sell it.
And yet again, when he's about to get out of here, Peter's first thought is, "You are
To
going
save
to
it.
die. I gotta save you."
And here's what I love about this fight. You wanna know what I love about this fight?
Yes, please.
He doesn't win. He essentially loses this fight. He does not beat Vulture.
Yeah, no, he loses the physical fight. He loses the well, most of the stuff that Vulture was trying to steal is fine, but like,
He's yeah, like he wins. Well, ostensibly he basically wins because he was able to stop Vulture, and he mangled like that whole altercation mangled his suit enough to where he couldn't get away, regardless. But
yeah,
he doesn't actually end up winning that fight. I
like
really like
Peter.
that.
Yeah, Peter wins what he wants, or what he wanted, in the sense that he wins Happy's respect, he wins a place on the Avengers even though he doesn't take it, and he wins what he needed, like the whole want versus need thing, where he needed to grow up, and here he has grown up, and he's sorted his priorities properly. But that does not change the fact that, again, he's the guy who doesn't walk away from his fights unscathed. And generally, we've been good about that generally in these movies, where, at least visually, a lot of the MCU heroes tend to be kind of beat up and mangled throughout their films. But here you really feel it. Like
Yeah, you
everything
feel
from,
it the most with Spider-Man.
yeah, like again, part of that is because he's a kid, and part of that is like everything from a building being dropped on him up to now. It's like he has not gotten a break for the past several scenes, and yet he muscles through anyway. He does what needs to be done, and yet he doesn't come out of it seeming like a winner. But he did the right thing, and that's what matters.
And keeping the villain alive felt fresh here in a way it didn't with the Amazing film, just because I mean we don't do anything with Tombstone Far From Home. We don't even bring him back in that movie. But it felt like a clear choice, especially given the post credit scene. That we were like building to something with him, and it just like keeping the villain alive feels fresh here in a way it didn't with the Lizard, I guess, mainly because the Lizard wasn't even a good villain.
Yeah. Also, I'll say this. I know I said that I was going to avoid talking about the Disney Sony thing hardly at all. If Sony does end up keeping Spider Man exclusively and we stick with Tom Holland, man, do I hope that they keep Tunes. Like, the worst thing that could happen, like, the worst case scenario, is we get Sony helmed movies with Tom Holland and we get a Vulture that's not Michael Keaton. That is worst case scenario to me. Like, you have a perfect villain ripe to just use whenever you want right there. And if they can't use Michael Keaton's Vulture for like some contract reason, that will be so heartbreaking. And this is again the consequences of being Spider-Man. You could say Liz Liz kind of sort of absolves him for it, where she doesn't blow up at him the way you might expect, but I appreciate that because that's just she feels like a real person. Like
Well, that
again,
and she has much bigger issues in that her dad's going to jail and
yeah.
she's
And like
being forced to move.
that is Peter's fault, but she doesn't know that.
Yeah, she doesn't know that, but that feels more like the reason that she doesn't blow up. And like, yeah, like she feels like a real person who's like, not taking the stereotypical route and being super angry at him for ditching her. But it feels like the reason for that is mainly because of her dad and her being forced to move. Like I don't feel like if she's not tied to like Vulture at all and him being his dad and all that, and the rippling effect that has on her, I feel like her reaction is probably significantly different.
Yeah, depending on what excuse he ends up coming up with. But either way, it's less that like he had to bail on her at the dance, and more like, oh man, it sucks that her life is pretty much torn upside down because you had to do what you had to do.
And the previous scene, as you said, definitely indicates that she has a crush on him, but we don't get an indication that that is in any way reciprocated. And yeah, it's just, I mean,
And it,
we've spoken to that enough, I guess. But this is the scene that everyone pretty much found funny in the theater. And I guess my theater experience is the reason I found this funny. But going back to this, it always feels like just an intrusive gag scene.
this is the one gag in this movie that feels too intrusive, where it's like Happy is a character that we play for comedy a lot, and there's a lot of comedy wrung out of his and Peter's relationship. But at the same time, even in just this movie, the relationship between the two of them is important. Like like Peter earning Happy's respect is is meaningful, and I would not have undercut that with a joke. Especially with another scene that I had neglected to mention, the second deleted scene that I would have kept, which is like if the MJ scene was there and I could keep two deleted scenes, I would also keep a scene that they cut of Happy on the night of Vulture taking the stuff, where he's talking to his mom, and he's like, "I don't need you always checking in on me. I can do this kind of stuff. Like I know what I'm doing." And like I like that as an intentional parallel, where like Happy's mom is to him what he is to Peter, where Peter just wants Happy to take him seriously and believe that he knows what he's doing. And I like that they have that thing in common. And like the relationship between the two of them is more than just a gag. And I would have liked to have let Happy showing respect and appreciation for Peter play out as its own scene.
You make a fair point. Um, this scene is great. It's
I
interesting
like
because
I like this little line. He's like, "You screwed the pooch, but you raised the hybrid puppies."
yeah, that's not really a great analogy.
But yeah, what were you saying?
It's interesting in looking at this scene and like I really liked this because he doesn't like officially become an Avenger. Um, and this Iron Suit is super cool and a hell of a lot cooler than the one from the comics in Civil War. I hate that suit with a burning passion. But
See,
this,
I'm torn because I would have said, yeah, I prefer this design and like the Iron Spider comic suit. I just don't know how you could make that work in live action. And then I saw someone do a render of it in like the style of the PS4 game, and it looked incredibly amazing.
it's actually in the PS4 game.
Oh yeah, I actually forgot about that because it is, but the render I'm talking about was like a fan made thing before that was announced. And so I was just like, wow, what a coincidence. But like even having seen that fan render, I was like, oh no, you know what? This could work in like a 3D rendered like live action context. That said, I'm I'm kind of on the fence about both suits. Like both Iron Spider suits, like taking aside like do you want Peter to be that high tech? I am just kind of torn on both of them design wise. And like we'll
I'm
talk about that when we see it in Far From Home, but like yeah, it's a
I'm
little
not torn on it at all design wise. But I would have preferred him to just be wearing that when he shows up in Avengers movies. I didn't need him in Far From Home to be wearing that really at all, especially since he's just fighting normal thugs and he doesn't
yeah.
need that.
You don't even need the whole like it. I don't even think it raises a question of like, well, how do
There's
you
actually
get?
a bit in that fight scene in the extended cut that I don't like where he just like stops fighting and moving around for a second and gets hit by a bunch of bullets and pretends to die and he's like, just kidding, I'm bulletproof. I'm like, yeah, you could have just dodged those bullets. Like, why are you being it's
I don't have a problem with that. I think that's him messing with them.
yeah, but
That's him being like, oh, it doesn't really matter if you hit me anyway, so I'm just gonna pretend to get hit just to rub it in your noses.
yeah, it's funny and all, but I
I don't know. It
I don't
felt
know.
like an in character thing. It felt like something he'd do.
Funny enough, there's an interview. I think in one of John Favreau's shows, Gwen Paltrow doesn't even remember being in this movie. She thinks she
Yeah,
shot this scene for an Avengers film.
that's unfortunate because it's just, a lot of people don't know this, but Gwyneth Paltrow like years ago admitted publicly that she just has memory issues in general, and it's like it's not a fun thing for her. So it's not just this cameo. Like she on the regular cannot remember things about her life, and I feel kind of bad for her. That said, seeing her in that scene after basically a solid year of everyone asking, like, is she even still going to be doing these movies? And just to have her walk up in there was like nice. And it was also just nice to see that her and Tony were back together because, like, them being separated in Civil War, even though we have zero context for how that happened or whose idea it was, just like it made you feel really bad for him. And it's good that after that movie, he has her back. So yeah,
Um,
that's,
I get that.
how do you feel about that as an ending note for this movie? Because
Well,
I think
given
it's
Far From Home, I
let's ignore Far From Home.
all
Just
right,
as
fine.
as an ending to this movie, how do you feel about it?
I love it. I think it's hilarious, and it's an interesting status quo shift to like going out of the first film. Like Aunt May already knows. Like, okay, cool. Like, let's see where that goes.
Agreed. And then again, if Aunt May in Far From Home felt like the same character as she was in this movie, then that could have maybe even bolstered this, where what was funny in this context now feels kind of,
It has some pathos to it.
yeah, it feels kind of like like a little bit dramatic, where it's like it's
Yeah,
funny in for a second, the
but
same way
there's
like,
actually dramatic weight and it's relevant.
yeah, where it's like again in real life things can seem funny before you have the chance to process it, and then once the audience and the characters have time to process it, it's like this is not a funny thing. And it's just Far From Home. I will maintain, and like I will bring this up however many times I have to in the Far From Home commentary, her handling is the worst thing about that movie.
Yeah.
It's like
Um,
I feel so bad because I always like every time I watch this movie, I like her more in this movie. And so it makes that aspect of Far From Home even worse for me. Where like I thought she was just okay in this movie the first couple of times I watched it. Talking about it now, I really, really like what we do with her here, and I just wish we kept on that track.
so do I. Um, this is interesting. Like we I think we've only done maybe one or two, if any, actual opening credits for MCU movies. We typically don't do that. We rarely even get a title card at the beginning of MCU movies. Um, which like I'm glad we're finally getting that for shows. Like we have really cool opening credits for shows. I get why you're not going to do that for movies because runtime is already such a big thing that every studio is really struggling with, and you don't want the movie to feel too long.
Yeah. That said, I miss opening credit sequences in movies. Like they're always just so fun. And we talked over earlier. We didn't mention the Scorpion setup, but I'd really like to see Scorpion in a live action Spider-Man movie. I think he could be really cool. Can we do
And
that,
part of
please?
me doubts that this setup actually means we're going to get any of Scorpion or that we're building the Sinister Six at all. Not that I necessarily need them to, but the fact that they kept Vulture alive, they introduced Scorpion, and the fact that we were getting Mysterio in the sequel, I was like, oh, we're actually building the Sinister Six for MCU. This is going to be awesome.
Yeah, you have the thing where them having killed Mysterio made you think they're not going to do Sinister Six, and like they could or they couldn't. I I'm still convinced that at some point down the line that is part of the plan. And like I we've done Sinister Six without Mysterio multiple times.
That's true, but if you're going to if you're building the Sinister Six, why not have a villain show up in every movie and be significant?
I don't know because I feel like you could maybe argue that that's just kind of one, we don't want all of our movies to feel like they're setting up the next movie thing. People
That's
complain
true.
about that enough as it is. And
Hmm.
also just again, for as serialized as these are, we want our movies to we don't want everything to feel like pieces of a puzzle, you know? So like it's not like in the comics or in Spectacular Spider-Man fought someone and then every single person he fought was just setting up for Sinister Six. And like again, movies are a different medium. You only have so many releases a year that you're able to do, or every couple of years. So maybe on that level, but like I don't know, nothing seems all that wrong to me about like we'll set up some villains for the Sinister Six in one movie, and then the next movie can just be its own thing. And then we'll set up some villains for Sinister Six in the next movie. Like that just feels natural to me. But I don't know. There's like we're at the end here, and I don't necessarily want to talk over all the credits, just because like we've got another post-credit scene, but it's not really anything all that special. But in keeping with the end credit sequence, someone raised a decent point which carries from this movie into Far From Home, which is that for as much as we've generally accurately gotten like the vibe and the feel of youth in like 2017 and 2019 and kids interacting and that kind of stuff. It's kind of weird that all of the licensed music that plays across both of these movies are from like the generation before Peter's, if not older. Like there is no contemporary music that you get the sense that kids Peter's age would be regularly listening to in either of these movies.
I'm fine with that because it's just part of the movie soundtrack, and it's not like Guardians where like you have the music like in universe, like in scene, playing throughout a scene.
True,
You're just scoring the movie with songs, so
but
that doesn't
it's
really bother me.
see like I have the thing where for me it's fine because and this is going to be like a weird like deep cut, but if anyone has watched the Jimmy Neutron movie that was basically the theatrical pilot for that show, that's where I first heard the Ramones. And so like when I think of that song, I associate it with like youth and like young people having fun anyway because it plays during like a whole montage of kids going crazy in that movie. So like there the association works for me. But for like people who like listen to the Ramones regularly, they don't have that association necessarily. And so whether or not it's an in-universe thing, it's just an interesting point of like people in the audience are going to associate the songs that you pick with certain things. And if you really want to sell the like modern 2017 high school vibe, maybe do a song that's more of the time that people in that like demographic would be listening to just because of audience association.
I don't really have that. I don't feel like they should, or that they necessarily even need to play to that when the movie itself is doing a good job of being modern enough.
Yeah, it just would have been one other thing, I think. But yeah, like I don't know, like I guess it's time for final thoughts. Like I keep having this is one of those movies, and I gotta stop letting this happen to me just because I spend a lot of time in discourse with people who don't like MCU movies and in particular don't like MCU Spider-Man. I always have that thing where I'm like, is this going to be the time where I sit down with this movie and I don't like it as much? Nope. I feel like I like this movie now more than I ever have.
I've always liked it, and my my issues with it really haven't changed in the dozen or so times I've watched it.
Yeah, like I've never disliked it. Keep in mind, whenever I have these insecurities, they never end up being true. But it's just a regular thing where I'm like, what if this time I don't like it? Okay, I liked it. What if this time? What if this time? And it never happened. So I gotta stop like letting those insecurities get to me. But I feel like this is a really cleverly written, really thorough movie. Like thorough is the best word. Like I feel like there's so many little details across every scene in this movie that is strengthening the characters and strengthening the themes. And this is a movie that knows what it wants to say, and it has a couple of interesting things to say, and it says it smartly without like banging you over the head about it. And it's just a really cool Spider-Man story. Like the one area where it's maybe deficient compared to the others is the action, and yet even then on this viewing that plays better to me as like just it fits with the Spider-Man and the Peter Parker that we have established for this movie. It's like I don't know, like I think it's currently in a place because for a long time, like a couple of months, I had this movie, the first Raimi movie, and the first Amazing movie tied for my like the best live action ones. Right now, I think this is the second best live action one. The first Raimi movie for me is just so perfect in like a lot of ways, and it has some issues that this movie doesn't have, but its strengths are like ridiculous. Whereas this movie is a close second. I think it's the first Raimi movie. Yeah, the first Raimi movie, this movie, and then everything else is running for like second or third place under those two, live
Uh,
action wise.
Well, talked over the post-credit scene, but
It's a nice gag.
yeah, that is one of the few that are just a joke or that I'm actually okay with.
It's also just, again, talking about the little things. I like, how many more of these? Like, I like that. I like that Steve is kind of like, I don't want to be doing this all day. But yeah, so this movie, I love it. I really love it. It's this viewing has only strengthened it for me. Second best, maybe tied for best live action Spidey movie. With that said, in reality, all of the live action Spidey movies are running for second, and you can join us next time where we talk about first place, baby. It's Spider Verse time.
And I don't know if you're gonna get the digital version um, for Far From Home, but I am, and that comes out on September 17th.
Yeah, so within a decent time frame, we are still going to talk about that movie. So yes, that is in fact going to be part of part of this whole thing. So look forward to that when it comes. But for now, we will be stopping momentarily at Into the Spider Verse. So join us next time for that.